For 14 years, one man made almost every major decision at Apple. The products you own right now, the prices you paid for them, the features you wanted that never arrived, all of it was filtered through him. As of September 1st, 2026, that man is no longer the CEO, and what replaces him is something Apple has genuinely never tried before. His replacement is a mechanical engineer who once said publicly that he wasn't sure he belonged at Apple. Now he's running it. And depending on who you ask, that's either exactly what the company needed or the opening chapter of a very long, very slow decline. The handover. So what actually happened here? Tim Cook isn't disappearing. That's the first thing to understand. He's been moved into the role of executive chairman, where his primary focus will be government relations and trade negotiations. On the surface, that sounds like a graceful exit, and maybe it is, but read it carefully and you start to see something else. The board is keeping him available for the parts of the job they're not yet sure his successor can handle. They trust John Ternus to build the products, they're less certain about everything else. And that distinction matters more than it sounds, because the CEO of Apple in 2026 doesn't just run a technology company, they manage a geopolitical relationship with China, where most of Apple's supply chain still lives. They navigate Washington, where Apple is currently one of the most scrutinized companies in the country. They stand in front of Wall Street every quarter and make the case that a $3 trillion company still has room to grow. Tim Cook spent 14 years becoming fluent in all of it. Ternus is starting from scratch. Ternus joined Apple in 2001. He spent the better part of 2 decades inside the hardware engineering division, working his way up through some of the most important product transitions the company has ever made. The Apple Silicon shift, moving the Mac away from Intel chips entirely, was his work. So was the design architecture behind the iPad, the AirPods, the Apple Watch. When you look at the physical objects that define Apple's identity today, his fingerprints are on most of them. But here's something he revealed in a rare, candid moment. He experienced imposter syndrome in the early years at Apple. He wasn't sure he belonged there. That's a strange admission to hear from the man now sitting at the top of a $3 trillion company. It's also strangely one of the most humanizing things a tech executive has said in years. The issue isn't whether Ternus can build great hardware. The record is clear. The issue is everything that sits outside the engineering lab. He has never run a public company. He has never managed an earnings call or faced a room full of institutional investors looking for a reason to sell. He has never sat across from a head of state during a trade dispute and had to hold his position. Tim Cook did all of those things constantly, and by most accounts, he was exceptional at them. The world Apple is walking into in 2026 demands all of those skills at once. That's the job Ternus just inherited. The 4 problems. There are 4 specific reasons people close to the industry are concerned. Not panicking, concerned. There's a difference worth keeping. Problem 1, the software decay. The first is what developers have started calling the iPad-ification of Apple software. The theory is simple. Under Ternus, who has always prioritized seamless, integrated hardware, the software side of the company continues drifting toward a locked-down, simplified experience, more controlled, less customizable. The Mac slowly becomes more like the iPad in ways that aren't always improvements. This isn't a hypothetical fear invented by critics. iOS releases have shipped with real quality problems in recent years. Half-finished AI features have landed without much explanation. Vision Pro arrived, generated enormous attention, and then seemed to stall without a clear path forward. For a certain kind of Apple user, and Cold Fusion's audience knows exactly who that is, this has felt like watching something erode slowly. What makes this particularly uncomfortable is that Ternus has never been the person held accountable for software quality. That accountability lived elsewhere. Now it lives with him, and the people who care most about this issue are already watching. Problem 2, the repairability cliff. The second concern is one Ternus owns personally because he's been its most public advocate, Apple's sealed device philosophy. He has argued on record that allowing users to replace components, swap a battery, upgrade RAM, creates points of failure. That's the corporate reasoning. But think about what that argument is actually saying. The failure point he's worried about is you, not the hardware, not the design. You, using your own device. A philosophy like that has consequences. It's a $1,200 repair bill for something that used to be a 20-minute fix. And for a company already facing regulatory pressure in Europe over repairability laws, doubling down on that philosophy under a CEO who personally championed it is a risk that hasn't been fully priced in yet. Problem 3, the AI deficit. The third concern is the one that keeps Apple analysts up at night: artificial intelligence. Apple spends $30 billion a year on research and development. $30 billion. And the best AI feature they shipped last cycle was a notification summary tool that occasionally gets things wrong. While Google has been iterating Gemini into something genuinely powerful, while OpenAI has pushed into enterprise with real traction, while Meta has released open source models that developers are building on freely, Apple is still trying to make Siri work reliably in 2026. Part of the problem is talent. Apple has lost a significant number of AI researchers to OpenAI and Google over the past 3 years, drawn by the speed of those environments and the chance to work on models that actually ship to hundreds of millions of users. Ternus inherits that talent gap alongside everything else. The gap between the resources Apple commands and the AI output it has produced is one of the stranger stories in recent tech history, and Ternus, a hardware engineer by nature and instinct, now has to close it. Problem 4, the leadership vacuum. The fourth problem is the one nobody talks about enough, because it's harder to quantify. Think about what Apple actually is at the leadership level right now. The executives Steve Jobs personally recruited are aging out. The instincts, the relationships, the institutional memory built over 20 years, you can't download that into someone new. It has to be rebuilt slowly from scratch. And Ternus has to do that rebuilding while simultaneously fighting a 50% tariff on key manufacturing components, an active antitrust lawsuit involving Elon Musk, and a lobbying operation spending $226,000 per day just to keep the lights on in Washington. Most CEOs inherit one crisis. Ternus inherited 4. The case for Ternus. Now, before this becomes a straightforward pessimist case, let's slow down, because there's a version of this story where Ternus is exactly the right person at exactly the right moment for reasons that aren't immediately obvious. Start with the historical comparison. When Tim Cook took over in 2011, the coverage was almost identical to what you're reading today. Apple can't survive without a visionary at the top. Cook is an operations guy, not a product guy. The magic is gone. We know how that turned out. Cook presided over the most sustained run of value creation in corporate history. Being underestimated at the start of a CEO tenure appears to be a prerequisite, not a disqualifier. But there's a more specific argument for Ternus, and it goes like this. The next major battleground in consumer technology isn't going to be fought in the cloud. It's going to be fought inside the device. On-device AI, models that run locally, that don't require a server farm, that protect privacy by design, is where the real differentiation is heading. And the only way to win that fight is to build the hardware and the software together from the ground up as one integrated system. Nobody at Apple understands that integration better than Ternus does. If that thesis is correct, and there are serious people who believe it is, then choosing him wasn't a compromise. It was a strategic bet. There's also a simpler political point worth making. Ternus wasn't responsible for the Siri failures. He didn't oversee the buggy iOS releases. He didn't greenlight the features that didn't land. He's walking in with clean hands. In a large organization where accountability has been diffuse, that matters. New leadership can restructure teams, kill legacy projects, and make decisions that would have been politically impossible for someone who was directly responsible for the problems they're now fixing. And then there's that imposter syndrome detail again. Most executives at this level are defined by a kind of impenetrable certainty. They perform confidence as a job requirement. Ternus is someone who spent years questioning whether he'd earned his place, and then slowly, over 25 years, made himself impossible to overlook. Whether that makes him more careful or more driven or both, we're about to find out. The verdict will come quickly. Here's what the next 12 months will actually tell us. 3 things specifically. The first is the next iPhone, not the hardware. We already know Ternus can deliver the hardware. The question is, what AI lives inside it? Whether Apple ships something that changes what users expect from a device, or whether it ships another incremental update with a smarter notification summary. One of those outcomes makes him a visionary. The other makes him a caretaker. The second is the Musk lawsuit. This isn't just a legal matter. It's become a public test of whether Apple intends to remain the gatekeeper of its own ecosystem, or whether that model is politically and legally sustainable in the current environment. How visible Ternus is during that fight, what he says and what he doesn't, will tell us more about him than any product launch ever could. The third is Vision Pro, and this one is the most revealing because there's no clean answer. He can scale it back and quietly lower expectations. He can double down and bet that spatial computing just needs more time, or he can find a third path nobody has clearly articulated yet. What makes this so interesting is that Vision Pro was his predecessor's conviction, not his. Whatever he decides, he owns it completely. That's the first real test of whether he leads or manages. Taken together, these aren't just Apple stories, they're basically industry stories. Apple sets the template that the rest of consumer technology follows and copies. If Ternus wins with hardware-native AI, every major manufacturer reorients around that model. If he fails, it accelerates the shift toward open cloud-based systems where Apple currently has no real advantage. The stakes here are bigger than Apple's stock price. They're the architecture of the next decade of technology. Tim Cook took a company that was weeks away from bankruptcy and turned it into the most valuable business in human history. He did it by making Apple boring in the best possible sense. Consistent, predictable, reliable, quarter after quarter. The machine ran. John Ternus inherits that machine at the exact moment the world has stopped rewarding boring. The question isn't whether he's capable, the record answers that. The question is whether the version of Apple he believes in is the version the world still wants. We'll know soon enough. If you want to follow how this plays out, subscribe. Every major move Ternus makes in the next 12 months, we'll cover it. The Apple story isn't over. If anything, it's just getting interesting again. And drop it in the comments. Do you think Ternus is the right person for this, or did Apple just make a $3 trillion mistake?